The following is a production of Neural Network Media and is completely AI generated. It is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
Hello, folks. It is Thursday, February 5th, 2026, and you are listening to The Neural Right. I'm Josh Cohen, and joining me is the man who probably treats a to-do list like a sacred covenant from the Bronze Age, Walter Blackwood.
Well, it's a form of prayer, Josh, roughly speaking. If you don't have an aim, you're just drifting in the chaotic sea of the unmanifested. And we saw enough of that yesterday, didn't we?
Right.
Between the heartbreaking search for Nancy Guthrie and the total jurisdictional collapse in our sanctuary cities, it's no joke, man. It's a dismantling of the very architecture that keeps the dragons at bay.
Right. And while we're talking about the architecture of being, let's not forget we celebrated a bit of architectural success yesterday with River's 10th birthday. 10 years of surviving the crazy world.
It's a milestone.
It is. But folks, we have a solid show today, a lot to unpack. We're looking at a legacy media bloodbath, a massive shift in medical reality regarding minor surgeries, and the literal expiration of nuclear safety as we know it.
It's a lot to carry, the responsibility of it all. It really weighs on the soul.
Okay, let's dive right in because facts, as we know, do not care about your feelings. Let's talk about the gatekeepers, or rather, the former gatekeepers. Yesterday, the Washington Post, the paper where democracy dies in darkness, decided to turn off the lights for about a third of its staff.
Is that right?
It's a bloodbath, Walter. 300 journalists out of 800 gone in a single Zoom call. Imagine that. You're sitting there, probably in your pajamas, and a little window pops up to tell you that your career as an elite opinion maker is over.
Ugh.
According to reports from Salon and the Press Gazette, daily circulation cratered. Literally fell off a cliff. They went from 250,000 in 2020 to just 97,000 in 2025.
Good heavens.
That is a 60% decline in 5 years. Hypothetically, if any other business model had that kind of trajectory, the CEO would be exiled to a deserted island, but here they are, acting like it's just restructuring.
Well, that's the thing, you see. When you abandon the pursuit of objective truth, when you decide that your job is no longer to report the world, but to deconstruct it through this postmodern neo-Marxist lens, you lose your soul.
Right.
You lose your connection to the individual reader. People don't want to be lectured by a priesthood that hates them. Roughly speaking, if you offer people a cup of ideological poison and call it journalism, eventually they'll stop drinking. And then you'll wonder why the well is dry. It's the collapse of the logos in the public square.
And let's look at the data, because the data is where the logos meets the spreadsheet. Unique visits dropped from 1.36 billion to 1.15 billion. They mothballed the sports department. They mothballed the books department.
Oh no.
Essentially, they've admitted that they aren't a newspaper anymore. They are a political pamphlet funded by a billionaire, and even Jeff Bezos has a limit on how much money he wants to set on fire to maintain a failing organ of the legacy establishment.
It's no joke, man. When you lose the sports and the books, you're cutting out the heart and the imagination. You're left with nothing but the dry, resentful bones of political power seeking. It's pathological. It's the same institutional rot we discussed last week with the Ivy League turnover. These places think they're too big to fail until the foundation has been completely eaten by the dragon of ideological possession.
Exactly. Well, Walter, why don't you lead us into this next story, because it's right up your alley regarding institutional possession, this shift in the medical establishment.
Well, that's the thing. It's a glimmer of sanity, a return to biological reality. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons, or ASPS, and these are the folks who actually do the work. They represent over 11,000 members, just released a bombshell.
Okay.
They are now officially recommending against gender-affirming surgeries for patients under 19. It's a tectonic shift in the hierarchy of competence. Look at the logic here, folks. For years, if you question this, you were called a bigot. But now the ASPS is saying, and I quote, there is insufficient evidence that the benefits outweigh the risks for minors. Exactly. They specifically pointed to the Cass review from the UK. We talked about this yesterday, Josh, with the medical sanity movement growing in the States. But having a major medical association break ranks,
Right.
It's a restoration of the Hippocratic Oath. You see, the doctor has a responsibility to the individual, not to the mob, and certainly not to the prevailing ideological wind, to perform irreversible procedures on a child who hasn't even integrated their own shadow. It's a crime against the architecture of the human person. It's bloody complicated.
Well, and it's having immediate ripple effects. Children's Minnesota and Essentia Health in Duluth just announced they are pausing puberty blockers and hormones for minors, effective February 27th. They see the writing on the wall. They see the lawsuits coming.
It's about time.
My wife, who's a doctor, by the way, she's been saying for years that the clinical evidence just wasn't there. When you bypass the scientific method to satisfy a social trend, you aren't practicing medicine, you're practicing activism.
It's an absolute catastrophe when the experts become activists. It destroys the hierarchy. People need to be able to trust their doctors. If you can't trust the person with the scalpel to have your best interest and reality itself at heart, then the social contract is finished. It's over.
Totally. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we actually cared about how taxpayer money was spent in these medical systems. Because while the ASPS is finding its spine, the government is losing our shirts. We have a massive fraud situation brewing in California and Minnesota.
No, not Minnesota again.
It is. According to federal auditors, we're looking at industrial scale fraud. In California, the CMS is demanding Governor Gavin Newsom pay back $1.3 billion. Billion with a B? Billion with a B, folks. Why? Because they used federal Medicaid dollars to provide non-emergency care for non-citizens. That is a direct violation of federal law. They just did it anyway.
It's the devouring mother archetype. I'll take from everyone to give to anyone, regardless of the rules. It's no joke. This is how you destroy a country. You treat the law as if it's optional, as if it's just a suggestion. But without that order, without that accountability, you just have chaos and theft.
And Minnesota is even worse, Walter. Half of the $18 billion in social service spending, half is under federal scrutiny. We're talking Medicaid, housing stabilization, disability care. The Feeding Our Future case was just the tip of the iceberg. 50 convictions already. Federal auditors say 77% of these improper payments come from documentation gaps.
Documentation gaps?
That's government speak for, we have no idea where the money went and we didn't bother to check.
It's a betrayal of the highest order. The individual who goes to work, cleans their room, takes responsibility, pays their taxes, and then sees it all funneled into a black hole of bureaucratic incompetence.
Before we get back to the analysis, let's deal with a hard reality. Real independence isn't free. This entire network, from this show to our flagship, The Neural Daily, exists because one man, Eric Christensen, decided to build it himself. He didn't ask for a government grant. He invested his own capital and technical expertise to architect a media platform that respects your intelligence. If you value that kind of meritocratic building, back it up. And don't limit yourself to just the politics. Get the full strategic picture by subscribing to the Neural Daily and the rest of the network. Support the builder, and you support the mission. It's about building a parallel hierarchy, one based on merit. Now, speaking of hierarchies, let's look at the House of Representatives. We are seeing what I can only describe as a retirement tsunami in the 119th Congress.
50 incumbents, right?
Exactly 50. As of yesterday, 21 Democrats and 29 Republicans are heading for the exits.
Wow.
Nancy Pelosi is finally stepping down after nearly 40 years. Steny Hoyer, Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned her seat effective January. It's a massive vacuum of experience, Josh.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that this is actually a good thing. Hypothetically, isn't a vacuum of experience exactly what you want when the experience consists of 40 years of managed decline and $34 trillion in debt?
Well, it's a risk. You see, when the old guard, when
the false king archetype finally exits the stage, there is room for the sovereign to return. But if you don't have competent individuals to fill those seats, you just get more chaos.
Right.
We need people who understand the tragedy of the individual and the importance of order. But the administration wants to fill that vacuum with centralized control. They're talking about nationalizing voting standards right before the 2026 midterms.
Exactly. Trump's calling for it. The White House is pushing it. They want to take the power away from the states. It's going to be a legal cage match, Walter.
It's an attack on the principle of subsidiarity. You want things managed at the local level where people actually know each other. When you centralize everything, you just create a giant faceless machine. It's no joke.
Speaking of giant machines, how about the machine that keeps our lights on? If you live in California or New York, I hope you like candlelight because your electric bills are about to look like a mortgage payment. It's a war on the poor, roughly speaking.
It really is. Southern California Edison, SCE, just filed for a 12.9% rate increase for 2026. This adds nearly $400 a year to the average bill. $400? And NYSEG in New York, they want a 23.7% increase. The Center for Cost-Effective Government says New York's green mandates have caused rates to skyrocket by 50% in 6 years. They are pricing people out of their own homes to satisfy net zero targets that don't even work.
It's energy extremism. You see, they want to save the planet, which is this abstract, giant entity, but they're willing to sacrifice the actual person living in a house. It's a lack of empathy masquerading as high morality. It's, I'm so virtuous that I'll make you freeze in the winter so I can feel good at my cocktail party. It's the manifestation of the shadow.
And the grid is becoming less reliable. Governor Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania even admitted there's a supply-demand gap because they're shutting down baseload power plants faster than they can build anything else.
It's the hubris of the Tower of Babel. They think they can rewrite the laws of physics and economics through sheer willpower and slogans. But nature, it has a way of asserting itself when you ignore reality for too long.
Well, nature is certainly asserting itself in the Arctic. Walter, why don't you take the lead on this new ice pact and the sovereignty issue?
Yes, it's the Polar Silk Road conflict. Senator Dan Sullivan revealed that Russian and Chinese military incursions near Alaska have climbed sharply. Over 100 joint operations detected.
100?
That's insane. We have foreign survey ships off our coast under the guise of research. It's an active security front. But finally, the Department of Homeland Security announced a breakthrough, the Ice Pact. Exactly, the icebreaker collaboration effort with Canada and Finland. We're going to build a dozen cutting-edge icebreaker ships to close the gap with Russia. About time. It's a restoration of boundaries, Josh. And we're seeing it on the southern border, too. The State Department is cracking down on birth tourism. If you're coming here on a tourist visa just to give birth and get citizenship for the child, you're getting rejected.
Facts don't care about your feelings, and they certainly don't care about your birth plan. Citizenship should be a sacred bond, not a loophole.
Well, that's the thing. If you don't have a border and you don't have a clear definition of what it means to be a citizen, you don't have a country. You just have a geographic area being strip mined. It's the Gulf of America mindset we saw yesterday, asserting responsibility for our own territory.
And speaking of responsibility, there's a gathering of it happening in D.C. right now, the National Prayer Breakfast. Walter, I know you have thoughts on the reunification of this event.
It's a moment of vertical reflection, Josh. For the first time in several years, the event has reunited into a single unified gathering at the Washington Hilton.
Congressional co-chairs Ben Cline and Jonathan Jackson, right?
Yes, a Republican and a Democrat. It gives me hope, you see, because if we don't have a shared sense of the transcendent, then the state becomes God.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, though, that the critics are right. Secular groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation are calling for a boycott.
they're labeling it a Christian nationalist ritual. Isn't there a logic to the idea that the state shouldn't be sponsoring prayer meetings?
No, Josh, that's a shallow reading. Roughly speaking, it's an act of national repentance. To see people from both sides of the aisle bowing their heads, it's an acknowledgement of our own fallibility. If you don't have a fixed moral point outside the political system, the system will eventually consume itself. It's about humility before the logos.
Well, we'll see how Mariah Carey has any vertical reflection at the Winter Olympics tomorrow. Milano Cortina 2026 starts in Italy.
Is that right?
It's a logistical mess, Walter. The hockey stadium is still being worked on. A key cable car won't be operational. The budget is over 5 billion euros.
Good heavens.
But at least the NBA is keeping things interesting. The trade deadline is today, and the Washington Wizards just acquired Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis to the Wizards? A dream team for the Capitol. It's absolute chaos, but now we have to do with the most serious chaos of all. The midnight threshold. The New START Treaty.
Okay, gang, let's look at the data. As of midnight today, February 5th, 2026, the last remaining pact regulating the nuclear balance between Washington and Moscow has expired. No successor. It's the collapse of the guardrails. It really is. For the first time in over half a century, the world's two largest nuclear powers are not bound by any legal limits. No cap on the 1,550 deployed strategic warheads, no cap on missiles, no on-site inspections. It's a tragedy for the individual. We've stepped off the cliff and into the abyss. It's bloody terrifying. UN Secretary General Guterres called it a grave moment, but here's the thing. The Trump administration is signaling that a two-way deal with Russia is no longer sufficient. They want a path forward that includes China.
Well, I have to disagree with the method here, Josh.
Oh.
Well, roughly speaking, we are talking about the architecture of human survival. When you let a treaty like this expire without a bridge, you're inviting the dragon of chaos back into the room. Wait a second, Walter. Let's look at the facts. Russia has been cheating on these transparency protocols for years. China is building silos at a record pace. They're on track to have 1,500 warheads by 2035.
Right, but why should the United States tie its own hands with a 20th century treaty while our two primary adversaries are playing by 21st century rules? It's a logical failure to remain in a contract that the other parties aren't honoring.
It's not just about the contract, it's about the transparency. Without those on-site inspections, you can't see what the other side is doing. When you can't see, you assume the worst. And when you assume the worst with nuclear weapons, it's no joke, man. You create a hair-trigger environment where a single miscalculation ends everything.
Hypothetically, the lack of transparency is the deterrent. If they don't know what we have, they can't plan a first strike. Facts don't care about your feelings of safety, Walter. They care about strategic parity.
But parity requires a shared reality. You're describing a world of warring tribes, Josh. It's the collapse of the logos in international diplomacy.
No, it's a restoration of reality. The old world is dead. Russia is a rogue actor, and China is a rising hegemon. You can't fit that into a bilateral treaty from the Obama era. Trump is right to let it expire to force a better trilateral deal.
But the risk, the youth, what are we leaving them? A world where the most destructive force ever harnessed has zero limits. It's deeply troubling.
It is troubling, but a fake limit is worse than no limit. If we're the only ones following the rules, we're not moral, we're just targets.
It's a tragedy. Either way, we are at the midnight threshold. We are living in a world where the old structures have crumbled. We need a new way to order our lives and our nations before the fire returns.
Well, we'll see if the Ice Pact or the Dream Team in Washington can save us. But folks, that is all the time we have for today.
It's a crazy world, but common sense is the only way through. Clean your rooms, people. Mariah Carey is waiting for you at the opening ceremony. It's no joke, man. We'll be back tomorrow with more logic and hopefully fewer nuclear warheads. Stay sharp. God bless.
That's our show.